6 months later with the Sony FX6, and I can say that I really love this camera, and it's been crushing it every production that I've taken it on. So I want to get into a little bit of my experience and the pros and cons that I have with this camera, and yeah, so let's get into it. So the first day I grabbed this camera out the box, I was surprised about how light it was. Without the top handle and the side handle, this camera is extremely light. The way it's built, how compact it is, and just the ergonomics of the camera really just fits well. It feels comfortable, and ever since day one to today, 6 months later, even when this camera is completely rigged out, it's still comfortable to hold. And that's something I really appreciate about the Sony FX6 to this day. When you're purchasing a camera, the last thing you're thinking about is the handle and how comfortable it is. It's a small detail, but it makes a world of a difference. Just the handle alone on top of this camera makes shooting with this camera 10 times more fun than other cameras. And on the side handle, it has record button and other joysticks on the side handle that you can use to control the camera. I really love the redundancy of the buttons on this camera. You know, you have buttons on the top handle, you have buttons on the side handle, on the camera body, just everywhere, just buttons everywhere. This camera really just adapts to your workflow and how you like to operate your camera. A question I always get is about the menus. How are Sony treacherous menus, and have you gotten a handle on them? And I can say within a week of having this camera and navigating through the menus, I was comfortable going through and changing things and accessing different functions within the camera fairly quickly. And coming from the Blackmagic cameras, how simple and intuitive their menu system is, it wasn't that hard of a transition coming over or coming back to the Sony menus. People be hating on Sony menus, I don't know why. And I'm very comfortable with the Sony FX6 when it comes to the menu system, so not a problem for me. And I think that question comes from the worry of diving into the Sony menus and you can't find certain things, so you have to spend so much time just searching through the menu just to change one thing. And I can say that the Sony FX6 menus have yet to impede on my workflow and my process when I'm trying to change different settings in the camera. So I don't think it's anything to worry about as a friend, that it's not a big deal that you might think it is. So when I was picking up the Sony FX6, I was thinking about what I would be creating in the future and how can I get a camera that is pretty much future-proof for bigger productions and smaller productions that I will be on. Let's talk about how the Sony FX6 operates within smaller productions, you know, like social media content creation or just personal projects. How the Sony FX6 really shines in these one-man band scenarios is that it's so compact. Like I mentioned before, you can really just rock this camera and get high quality footage with just the battery, a good lens, and the on-camera monitor. And that's how simple using the Sony FX6 is on these smaller productions. So like I said, you can keep this camera very minimal and compact, and it will produce a quality image with minimal setup. That was very key to me when I wanted to shoot these YouTube videos in smaller productions. And another thing that the ego has to mention is when you're on these smaller productions, you want to impress the client. And having these smaller cameras sometimes just looks, you know, underwhelming, and people think you're not as professional. So even with a minimal bare bones setup with the Sony FX6, it has a more professional look when you're carrying it on these smaller productions. So you can definitely pass for being a professional with this camera when it's bare bones, not rigged out. And the ego would say that's definitely a pro. On these smaller productions, you're wearing so many hats, and you don't want to have to worry about if you're focusing right, or if you're just shooting simple, small content creation, you don't want to have to worry about are you landing focus sometimes, when it could just be a simple autofocus thing. You know, you can just track the face and you're good to go. And it's just one less thing that you have to worry about. You know, I never used autofocus on narrative projects or other film projects like that, but with smaller productions and content creation, autofocus is vital. I don't want to have to run back and forth in manual focus especially when I have to worry about other things on production, you know, lighting, audio. So yeah, one less thing to worry about when you're doing these content creation, smaller production type videos. You just want to, sometimes you want the camera to pull its own weight and help you with this process. On smaller productions, I rock with the BPU batteries. I have a BPU 35 and I have a BPU 60. I have two of the BPU 60 batteries. So when I want to keep my setup really small and minimal, the BPU batteries are a very, very good option when I don't want to use the V-mount batteries. All right, so let's talk about my experience with this camera on bigger productions. So on these bigger productions, to have a smooth workflow and work with others around you that are hired on, you need certain tools and features within the camera. So on my Sony FX6, I have two XLR inputs on the handle. The full-size XLR inputs are just more professional, and most likely you will need these full-size XLR inputs, especially when you're on these documentary type productions. Just having a really professional shotgun mic that goes straight into the camera, one, you don't have to worry about, you know, syncing audio in post. I've carried this Sony FX6 on huge documentary shoots where the A-cam is a Alexa Mini, and the image, the workflow, they really just match up well with these more professional cinema cameras. When you're shooting in documentaries, you have these changes in your environment constantly. It's very unpredictable sort of environments that you have to deal with. And when you're shooting documentaries, you don't have time to fumble with these 4x5 ND filters. So having internal ND on this camera, which is amazing on the Sony FX6, it's really been a key feature in this camera that I've used on these bigger productions. I know a lot of people like to compare the FX6 with the FX3, but in this specific area, when we're talking about variable ND, the FX3 doesn't have variable ND. Yes, it's smaller, it's more compact, you get the XLR inputs, but variable ND is just so clutch, and it really has been a key feature when I'm shooting with this camera. So when you're on these bigger productions, they require more from your camera. Most likely they're using SDI out for their video signal. Just having the SDI out port on your camera is just more of a professional, secure connection to your camera and your monitor. I never had a problem with HDMI with my mirrorless cameras or anything like that, but it feels more secure, it feels more professional, and it really just gives you more peace of mind when you're on these bigger productions. So when you're on production and you have a sound guy on set and he needs to jam timecode, it's super simple. So that's another thing that gave me room to grow with this camera. If I wanted to have a sound guy on set, your editor won't hate you because timecode is all over the place, and yeah, you gotta sync it, and it's just a terrible process. So on bigger productions, you can build this camera out to a full cinema rig. There's just so many options and so many just ways to rig things out on this camera. You really can just have this camera rigged out with all the bells and whistles and accessories that you need to make it through a 12-hour day. When I had the Sony FX6 just completely rigged out, you know, just ready for a cinematic film with all the accessories, it didn't look ridiculous like when I used to rig out my pocket camera. On my pocket camera 4K and just rigging it out with all these moving parts on the camera, it got a little just silly looking, and it just didn't look as professional. When you're rigging the Sony FX6 out, it just looks like everything is working together and it doesn't look ridiculous. So when I rig the Sony FX6 out for bigger productions, it gives me the option to really configure it and sculpt my rig the way I like it. And the camera body itself might be very light, but it feels durable. It doesn't feel like if I drop it or it will break. Or I believe the camera is built out of some strong type of carbon fiber type of plastic. I don't know to the technical specs of it, but it doesn't feel like I would break this camera transporting it, or I feel like I can rely on this camera to turn on. The buttons won't get, you know, smushed in or broken, or the monitor snapping off. It just feels like the camera is durable and I can really give you know, give it a beating if I want to. On these bigger productions, you use a lot of different lenses and lens mounts. And fortunately with the Sony FX6, you can swap out the mount fairly easy. When I was shooting a documentary, I wanted to use some anamorphic lenses which had a PL mount. So having a mount that's so interchangeable, it's just fun, you know, using different flavors of glass and just experimenting with looks in conjunction with the Sony FX6 has just been nothing but fun. So within these 6 months, I do have a few things about this camera, if I had to nitpick, that I don't like. One, we can start with the camera monitor that it comes with. I believe it's like a 3.5-inch monitor, and it's okay. But if you're anything like me, you would need a external monitor. I'm shooting with a small HD 702 touch monitor just to have that big monitor to help dial in my look, because the 3.5-inch monitor, it just won't cut it. You know, just the look of it, just the feel of it, just having that small monitor on camera, it gets the job done if you're doing like small YouTube stuff, but on bigger productions like narrative or documentary, you really want to see your image so you can make sure you're not missing anything and you see the details in your shots to help you dial in your look. Another thing with the Sony FX6 that I thought was kind of just weird is the microphone holder. When you buy the Sony FX6, you can't just throw a regular sized shotgun microphone on top without having a spacer. I've seen a lot of guys on the Sony FX6 Facebook group talking about you need to put foam or purchase a spacer online that's not included with the Sony FX6. You know, it would have just been cool if they would have included a spacer with the Sony FX6. It's like, this camera is $6,000. You can't put a piece of foam in the box to come with the camera. I don't know, but you really just have to think about the projects that you will be shooting. If you're shooting more smaller production projects and it's more personal based, I definitely say go with the FX3. But if you're moving more towards bigger production, narrative, documentary style shoots that you need the SDI and the timecode in and out and the variable ND, I say 100% go with the FX6. You won't be disappointed. And I'm not gonna sit here and debate about which camera is better than the other. It's really about what works for you and what is going to help you. I know that sounds cliche. I know every YouTuber says that, but you really just have to think about your situation and what functions and features that you're going to need that will help your workflow. When I was trying to get my FX6, it was on back order as well. I called a local camera shop and they had a Sony FX6, but it had the kit lens with it. So I did spend that extra bread to pick the Sony FX6 up, but I just end up selling the kit lens. And yeah, I'm happy that I did it because there's so many people that are still on back order trying to get this camera to this day. So yeah, so hopefully you guys got some value out of my opinions and my experiences with the Sony FX6 and my 6-month journey with the Sony FX6. Yeah, I didn't try to do the 6-month with the Sony FX6 thing. It really was just like, no pun intended. But thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and like, because that really helps my channel grow. But dislike if you don't like this video. You know, on YouTube, it's freedom to do as you please. But yeah, carry on.